that, I'll invite Arlene to come up and talk about the mental health and addiction space.
So thanks, Sean. There's not a feedback with the two mics, is there? Does that sound okay? Yeah, okay, great. Alrighty, so I'm the bearer of bad news essentially to talk about, our mental health and addiction system and how we're struggling and how there's a lot of issues that we're here starting today, to address together. But I think a lot of you are already familiar with the fact that 1 in 5 of us are living right now with mental health and or addiction that would be considered, clinically significant. So it's impairing your ability to function in your daily life. And that most of our mental health disorders and addictions are starting in young people, right? Before the age of 25, 75% of all mental health and addiction disorders have had their onset. And so when you think about, what we're doing in our teens and our early 20s into our 20s and 30s, it's a lot. We're trying to, maybe finish school. We're trying to figure out our identity. We're trying to figure out our relationships. We're trying to figure out work or how we're going to make money or just how we're going to be a part of this broader community that we find ourselves in. And if you're hit, with mental health or an addiction disorder, that stuff is all affected. And getting back on track with some of that stuff can be very challenging. So for us at Minds, we know that this is the critical time to make change, have the biggest impact on us that's possible. And so when we actually look across the world and in Canada specifically, out of all health conditions, so I'm talking about heart conditions, infections, you name it. Mental health and substance use disorders is the #1 cause of people not functioning out of any health condition, particularly in young people. And so it's kind of upsetting when you start to hear those statistics and realize, our government and others who are who we've asked to hopefully, support and lead us and make decisions on our behalf aren't putting necessarily the resources or the right resources in place, despite the science showing this is the #1 cause why we can't function. And so it's really, really important for us here today to say, we're part of the system. We do have a voice, and the Minds team, we're really dedicated to making sure that that voice can be heard and that you can actually act on your thoughts and your concerns and your ideas and your solutions. So that's why we're here today. So why is there so many people who are unwell? Why is there so many people that are struggling? And there's a lot of reasons why. It's complex. One of the things that we're focused on at Mind is trying to improve just the resources available in our system. So there is a lack of resources. And sometimes it's not that there's no resources, it might just be that the resource isn't a good fit, or it's not available when you need it. Or you have to get, a particular level of illness in order to access a resource when maybe you could have benefited from accessing something much earlier in your journey. So that's one of the issues that we're really focused on Minds is how do we improve the actual resources in our mental health system or create new ones that don't currently exist but ought to. Stigma. I know we've come a long way, but we're still not there. Even when you think about how much money are, big institutions or governments putting towards mental health, it's a lot less than some of the other health conditions. And you have to wonder, is that because mental health and addiction disorders are just not still treated the same? They're still not valued the same way as maybe, a heart condition, for example, right? The social determinants. These are all the things in our day-to-day life that affect our health. Our genes are only a small percentage of why we get a certain illness or why we get sick. The main reasons why we get sick are what's happening in our environment, how we're being treated, whether, we have access to funding, to housing, to education, to work opportunities, whether we're being discriminated against, whether we're being excluded for some particular reason that's unfair, whether we experience as an individual trauma and violence, and or we're part of a community that experiences trauma and violence. Those are the bigger reasons why we struggle with our health, including mental health and addictions. And so part of mine is figuring out, how can we ensure that not only are we improving people's mental health and addictions, we're getting to some of the root causes of why people are having this problem in the first place, or why their problem may be perpetuated because of the living conditions or what they've been exposed to. So it's really important. And then, of course, many people are becoming more and more aware that our physical environment, the air that we breathe, right? The changes that we're seeing in our climate, the knowledge that we're receiving from scientists about our future planet. These are also, a big determinant now, especially we see this in young people, of how they're feeling in terms of their mental health. And then, just to make things even more complicated, the people who have been trained up, educated, and have been working in the mental health system to help people, they themselves are experiencing mental health issues more than ever before. And we have more people, doctors, nurses, social work, and others, psychology, caseworkers, that, especially through COVID, have left their roles because of two big reasons. Their own mental health is poor, and they're burnt out by the system that they went into to do something good. It's burned them out too. So now that we have kind of a bigger need of people going, hey, I need support, I need help, I need treatment. Unfortunately, we have less people ready to provide that. So it's really complex. So not only are we having to make sure that the system works and is compassionate, is effective for people who need it, it also has to be compassionate and supportive of people who work in it. Otherwise, we'll all become more and more sick. Okay. And then just some stats for our local, city and surrounding area. These are from, the last couple of years. So you can see, and of course, this is during COVID, so we know that people are under particular stress. But we had over 8,000 children's mental health crisis calls. Can you think about how many that would be per day? That's in 1 year. It was a huge increase from the year before. And then when you're looking at like teenagers and adults, it was 27,000 crisis interactions in 1 year in our city. And that's a big increase again from the prior year. So people are more and more in crisis. The good news is people are reaching out, which is great, but it's also showing that people are in acute crisis. And we're seeing not just mental health specific crisis, but also domestic and sexual violence crisis also have increased. And then when we're talking about the social determinants, so obviously violence being one of them, housing has also unfortunately worsened in our community during the last 10 years. So people are regularly turned away from resting spaces, so places that they can spend some brief time just to get out of the cold or just to have a place to get cleaned up and just rest. Even if it's only 24 hours, they're still being turned away. We have women being turned away from shelters who are fleeing violent situations. And there's more and more people who are living out in campsites, so not even in a structure. And we have more and more people also experiencing food insecurity, so the need to go to food bank in order to get sustenance. So when we think about those social determinants, they have all worsened in our community, and that's not unusual. We've seen this across Canada. Now, in terms of our mental health services, most of you are familiar, we do have some large institutions in our city providing services. That includes, there's 3 main London hospitals, and when I say 3, I'm including Children's Hospital. So up to 17 years old at Victoria Hospital, and then St. Joseph's Hospital. All hospitals in our city serving mental health and addictions. We also have smaller hospitals like St. Thomas and Strathroy that also have some service, but most of our services are centralized in London. We still, I hear it all the time, we still are having challenges moving people from the child and adolescent service up to an adult service. That is still not a smooth transition for many people who have started their mental ill health journey as a teenager or as a child. We have certainly family doctors and nurse practitioners in our city who do provide some mental health and addiction support, some more than others. But we have so many people in our city that don't have any primary care at all and may still require, going to a walk-in clinic where services usually quite limited when it comes to mental health therapies. And then we have many, many community-based agencies. So the CMHA, we want to use Opportunities Unlimited, and there's many others that are providing mental health and addiction support, as well as other supports like housing and social services. And then there's private practitioners, counselors and psychologists out in our community who are providing some counseling. But again, that can be difficult for many people to access because of the funding. And I should mention, we have seen some positive progress. So one of the things that our provincial government, the Ontario government, has funded, and it was inspired by what they were doing in the United Kingdom, was to make sure that there were counseling or psychotherapy for people that they didn't have to pay for. We're not fully there yet, but we are starting to roll it out across the province. So if you have depression or anxiety or PTSD and you want cognitive behavioral therapy or another form of therapy based on evidence, to access it through the hospital system for no cost, which is very different than even a couple of years ago. So that's something now available that wasn't when I first started here. The other thing that you may already be aware of too is that the addiction services in our city combined with the CMHA mental health community services into one massive agency serving London and some of the other surrounding counties. So there's been efforts there to try to better integrate mental health and addictions. The same is occurring at the hospitals. So now we have programs at the hospitals that are really trying better than ever before to integrate addictions and mental health. Whereas before they were often treated quite separately. And then there's other supports that many of us have to lean on and ought to lean on, and they're an important part of our mental health. And that's our own community, our families, our chosen families. That's a huge part of what keeps people well, or on the opposite, what can make people sick. School, for those that are attending, whether it's high school or alternative education or post-secondary like college or university, those services have been beefed up because many of the schools have realized that young people are struggling and spending their most time in school, so they have to have the services there to access them. Employees, or employers, I should say, people who are hiring, they're starting to realize my business won't do well unless I take care of the people working for me. So more and more people are realizing it's good for business to actually support the people that we are hiring so that they're not having to go off sick leave or aren't able to do their jobs because of the mental health addiction issues. And more we are seeing some improvement with trying to divert people from the forensic system into mental health and therapeutic streams so that their addictions and or the mental health issues aren't, landing them in jail unnecessarily and getting worse. And in fact, that they have an opportunity to get the actual support they need so that they don't have to continue in that life or in that cycle. Okay. So it is complex. Our mental health system is complex. I work within that system. I find it complex. People who work in the system, I often get phone calls and they go, Arlene, What should I do? My nephew is struggling. What service could they go to? And I'm trying to figure out, I think this service might have a wait list and perhaps this, maybe I have to do the emerge and this. It's not perfect. Even people working in the system, we know that there's a lot of gaps. But I do also know that there's many of us working in the system that want to do better. There's many of us that have that passion, that energy, even if it was often driven by frustration or our own burnout, we're not giving up. And we're here and we're working with these folks. They might not all be here today, but they are part of our minds collective to make change. And so I always like to remind people that the system isn't somewhere out there. It's right here. We are the system. And so if we're not happy with it, it's up to us to step in and say, enough, I want to be part of change. Even if it's not easy, even if I know it might take some time, or I have to step out of my comfort zone, or I have to be a leader when I've never really felt like I was a leader, or I have anything that you do. And the fact that you guys are here today is so meaningful. It's so exciting. And we need to do something together because we can't do it individually. One hospital won't solve it. One community agency won't solve it. One psychiatrist is not solve it. It's collectively. And that's why we're doing this event. Thank you. Looking forward to the next steps with you. Disruption. So disruption is often seen as a negative word, right? Like, ooh, disruption. Oh, geez, you're causing problems. You're getting in the way. No. When we have a system that's not working effectively, when we have a system that we can't access and get the care that we need when we need it, then disruption is a good thing. Disruption means a profound change that will improve how people get mental health support. So we need that. We need that paradigm shift. Let's not be limited to the current system. What I'm asking all of you to do over the next couple of days and into the next several weeks of this process is step away from the current system and allow yourself the freedom to think differently, think bigger, think better, think what might even sound impossible or even maybe silly and you're embarrassed to share it, do it. That's part of the creative process. That's part of innovation. Unlocking your own self, your own ideas, what you think is possible. So really try to do that. I know we don't do that very often in our day-to-day life in our society. As part of the innovation process, I'm asking you to do that. All right. So what would your paradigm shift look like? If you had to put down on paper right now, what should we prioritize in our mental health and addiction system? Right? What would be the goals? What do we want to see different? What should we focus on? There's so many challenges, so many issues. What approach should we take? What are some of the things that you would offer? What would you say? Just take that time to reflect. You may want to put it down on your page. For me, as a psychiatrist and somebody who has experienced, mental health, who's supported family and friends with mental health, I would say we got to focus on people. Not just labels, not just diagnoses, but people. As a doctor, I see somebody maybe for half an hour. They have 23 and a half other hours in their life that one day. And maybe I don't see them once a month. So what I can do to support that person in half an hour is pretty limited. Pretty limited. It would be way more effective for me as a doctor to figure out how I can support them outside of that half an hour clinic appointment. How can I create, for example, a job that's actually attractive and supportive and flexible so that they can be part of something that generates income, they feel they have a social support network, they feel they're contributing. That would probably be more effective. I think we need to focus on, obviously, prevention of poor health. And that can be at any stage of someone's journey. It could be before they've ever had an illness. It could be after somebody has had an illness, but let's prevent it from it relapsing. Or for some people, they may always have some symptoms, but how can we prevent them from those symptoms making their function deteriorate over time. And ensure that they continue to have a good quality of life, even though they might have symptoms of mental illness or addiction. And the idea of recovery, the idea meaning we all can live a good life, even though we may have challenges. It's important each person has the support that they can say, look, a good life for me means this. And people around them will go, okay, we'll help you make that happen. Because what my definition of good life may be very different than the next person. So recovery is really making sure that the person themselves that is experiencing illness, they're in the driver's seat. They get to determine what's important to them, what recovery looks like for them. How we define the system needs to be broadened. Please don't be limited to just thinking of the clinical system, so like the hospital or the emerge. That is part of our system. But we also have to see that if we're going to change the system, we have to think about the system differently, including what parts of the system don't even talk to each other, they're not connected, or maybe part of the system that don't even think about being important for mental health actually really is, because it really is detrimental to people's mental health. So we try to broaden even what you think of as the mental health system. And the model that I really think is promising, and that's why we're here today to focus on it, is social innovation. And so what is social innovation? It means getting people together that don't normally work together to look at how we can create new ways of connecting, of accessing services that not one group could have done on their own. So the process of innovation that we're going to take is really collaborative. It can only be done if people get together that don't normally, share ideas or learn from each other or work together. And then the innovation itself that we create together, it's also social, meaning it's good for us as humans. It helps our mental health, or it helps access to housing, or whatever it might be. All right, and as you already know, we are very, very keen on making sure that people are able to be in the present moment, not judge themselves or their thoughts or feelings, and have that space to be able to say, you know what's important to me? Kindness is important to me, or compassion is important to me, or peace is important to me. So being able to do things from a place of deep intention. Not just do things because you're reacting, because you're triggered. And then you're reacting from a place of fear or a place of uncertainty or anger. Instead, we're coming from a place of presence and intention. All right. So this is a famous quote by a psychiatrist who went through many different concentration camps in World War II. And had to figure out a way, his name is Viktor Frankl, had to figure out a way how he can still find meaning in his life, despite being in one of the most hellish places on earth. And he realized that even though so many things were happening to him and at him, so many worried thoughts, fear were coming up into his mind, he always had the opportunity to decide how he was going to respond, even to the worst things that ever happened to him. And that's what he talks about in terms of that space is our power, our choice to respond. And we can only do that in the present. So let's take this moment to decide if we're going to be change makers. Let's take this moment that the impossible, including improving our mental health, is possible. Let's take this moment to believe in ourselves, in our process. It may look weird. It may not look straight. You may go, where is this going? I don't get it. Trust it. Trust it. Keep coming back. Keep coming back with presence. We can't change the past. The future has not yet happened. All we have is right now. And the best way, I heard this quote recently, the best way to predict the future is to actually create it. So let's start creating the future together now, because this moment has already passed and it's the new moment. Every moment will turn into the future just like that. So what we create today, what we create together over the next days, weeks, is actually going to become our future. We don't have to fear it. We can be part of what that future becomes. We can create it. All right, so some of the processes that we take at Minds, and that you'll see other people doing social innovation take, are these, and we don't have to get into all the details, but a social innovation lab is similar to what we're doing. It's actually just creating a space for people to start talking, using knowledge, testing out ideas, getting funding to do it, getting supports to make it happen, learning from it, going, oh, it sounded like a good idea. We tried it out, it didn't work. That's not failure. That's called innovation. We're always learning. Failing, it's not a negative thing in innovation. It means you're just learning. You're like, oh, okay, that didn't work out. Great, let's take that knowledge and change something or take a different direction. But you wouldn't know that unless you try. So don't fear failure, okay? It's part of the innovation process. It's learning. Social entrepreneurship is another example. This is basically going, how do we use business? How do we create business ideas that aren't just about making money? They have to make money, of course, it's business. They're actually about making things better for people. There's a social goal to it. So an example of that would be, you know, a business where part of their profits go back to supporting, you know, new job creation for people who would otherwise not get a job. Goodwill Enterprises. It's an example of a social enterprise. All right. So we can do that. That can be part of your solution, is looking at how business and social needs can come together. Collective impact is also similar to what we're doing today, where we're bringing a really big group of people together over time to focus on one common agenda, one common issue. And this stuff takes time. Okay, so I do ask you guys, like, be, I guess the term is almost like persistent. I've learned from my experience doing social innovation is that it's not quick, but it's worth it. It's really worth it. And even the process of doing this together, you'll start to see other benefits come from it, because people are meeting that don't normally meet. You're learning new skills that you can apply elsewhere in your life, okay? You're opening up maybe what's possible for you. Maybe you're even learning new skills on how to manage your mental health day to day. The process itself can be beneficial in addition to the goals, the solutions that we create together. Okay. So some of the things that we put into our approach, so our training, our curriculum, is this idea of being and becoming, which I talked about, being present in order to create what you could become. And this is the paradox of life. You can accept yourself 100% just as you are, and at the same time say, there's things about me that I can improve. There's things about me that I can change. You could be both. You can accept yourself fully, compassionate, kindness towards self, and go, you know, there are some things that I can do better. And there. Transformational learning. This is how we do work. It's hands-on, it's guided, it's about you bringing your knowledge, learning from other people, actually creating change, not just talking about it and doing an assignment and handing it in. No, you're actually going to be designers and innovators, and we're going to learn from that. System leadership is another pillar. I really believe that leadership is obviously based on character, you know, what kind of values, what kind of person you are, not just what you say, how you act, but it's also very important is how am I going to work with other leaders? And I really want to see each of you guys see yourself as leaders and working together as system leaders to create change. And then the last thing, of course, is disruption. So the whole cycle we're going to take you guys through tomorrow on how do you actually even start brainstorming ideas? What do you do to determine what ideas you want to move forward with? How do you test them out? All right. And just to let you know, we have brought this approach to other places. So we're doing it here in London, Ontario as part of Minds, but we have done this work across the world, working with many different communities that have different mental health system needs. And we've always learned and approached any community that we work with in partnership to say we're partners, we'll learn from you. And so a lot of the research that we've done, a lot of the innovation we've done has been in places that, if you can only imagine, has much limited resources than we have here in London. and they can still create change. So can we. So I'm gonna leave it there, and I'm gonna ask Renee to come up, oh, Melissa, to specifically talk about collective system innovation. Thank you.
All right, so now that we have a little bit of a sense of what the system looks like, but why we're working together, how we're seeing ourselves as leaders in the space, we're gonna have a bit of time to do some reflection work. So again, we go to our agenda here, and we're going to this page, particularly this page 6. If they're not numbered, I apologize. So there's a couple of things I want to bring up. And first, I'm going to talk about a bit about the process moving forward, and then we're going to do that question. So the first thing, our process moving forward. So obviously today is our social innovation event. So think of this almost like a quick little sprint. We're going to do a bunch of work really fast, just to get some ideas down, figure out some groups, and have enough direction to guide us forward. Now, so the first note on here, it talks about how we're going to be doing the prototyping and the initial pitch. I know pitch sounds really formal and maybe a little bit scary. I promise it's not. It's one page, front and back, and we're just going to ask you some basic questions about what you want to create. And at this phase, all we're looking for is, does it touch on the issues that we need to discuss? Do we have people who are willing to take on some leadership positions in that role? And just tell us a bit about it so you can make sure that there's no huge overlap, two groups doing the same thing, at least without knowing that they can connect and learn together. The next thing we have, and actually the next thing period, is going to be our Minds Monthly Social. So we want to have an opportunity for you to come together, to meet with your fellow co-creators, to learn from each other, and also just to have a space that we can be in together, where we can have people with a similar mindset and similar experiences as us. So those are hosted innovation work. I've got all the dates of the upcoming sessions here, and they're from 6 to 9 p.m. We don't have registration for that, so you can see how you feel day up. But those are open for everybody, and they're also a great way for people who maybe aren't ready to commit to an event like this. So if you have a friend who might be interested in learning more, this may be a good way to meet some people and make it a little bit less scary. Third point here is how we're going to move forward working together. We have a Discord that we've set up. There's little postcards passed around. I apologize because the QR code doesn't seem to be working. If you type it in, it does seem to work. Regardless, I will email you after this session. I'll email everybody and you can log in there and figure it out. But we're going to use that as a place to keep all of your information. You'll be able to join different groups there. So even if a group, if you work on a project today or tomorrow and you want to be involved in a different project, you get that option. And we'll do that all through our Discord server. And then lastly, we're going to have 4 months of work to build on these interventions that we have today. So you're going to come up with an idea tomorrow, we're going to build on it over 4 months. And in January, we're going to ask you a few more questions and we're going to keep building on the that interventions. So that's a little bit about what to expect. So below we have 2 reflection questions. And I'm going to invite everyone to start by reflecting personally and then turning it to the table as well. So we have 2 questions. The one is, what are your hopes for today and tomorrow? So this can take a lot of different approaches. It can be more emotional, meeting people, being present, being able to be in the space because it is difficult, especially with as many people as are here. And it can also be very practical. Like, I want to make something that's a video. I want to do something where I learn to do this skill. So think about what you hope this whole experience will be like for you. And the second question is, what skills and experience are you bringing? And I know this is the question that always throws me off. I always get a little nervous because I'm like, oh, what skills do I have? You know, as soon as you ask me, I have no skills. But we all have a ton of skills. We all have a ton of things we can bring together. Maybe you have a really good memory and you can make sure people show up in meetings. Maybe you're really good at orienting people. Maybe you're really good with technology and you know how to use this. Whatever it is, it's just exploring, looking inward and thinking, what do I have that I can share with people? And what am I willing to share? Just because you have, even if you say one of your experiences, right? Maybe you had a really traumatic experience. You get to decide whether that's something you want to share in this space, whether you want that to be part of your experience. So this is really a chance for you to reflect on who do you want to be in this space? What things do you want to share? What things do you want to keep to yourself? So let's take 5 minutes or so to do that, and then we'll turn back to our small groups and just share with each other some thoughts we have. All right. We're gonna come back together as a larger group and see if there's any kind of themes emerging. No, we're getting more pop, by the way, because you've seen it's caffeine. So does anybody want to share any of the insights that they had during that reflection process? We got some there. They're really like.
I'm just sweating.
So one of the things I was talking about, I don't know who here has seen the documentary Crip Camp. It's a documentary about disabled folks who basically take the power into their own hands. They start at a summer camp for disabled folks. Some of them connect, they actually start living together, organizing together, doing different things. And it basically comes to a head with them, along with the Black Panthers, organizing a protest in San Francisco's City Hall, where they basically go and they have community care established. They have meals, they have people coming around helping change diapers, doing diets, whatever the people's cares are. And it's a really good example of how community can uplift itself if it's given the tools and if communities are given the tools and the power to do so. So I was talking with my group about the idea of incubating a space where we can educate ourselves. We can look in towards these solutions and use it as a tool to empower folks to build more and more solutions. So we're not just creating one solution, we're creating something that can birth all kinds of innovation from people who know things the best, whether that's bringing, different organizers or different, documentaries or different things in for people to learn and know their empowerment, basically.
Yeah, fantastic. Can you name the documentary again for anyone interested? Sorry, could you repeat the name of the documentary for anybody who's interested?
Oh, yes. It's called Crip Camp. Warning, obviously it uses language that's derogatory towards disabled people. It's reclaimed. It's all reclaimed from the people who are creating it. It's incredible and it's a must watch, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's so important to reclaim space for ourselves. I think so many of us feel that sense of isolation, obviously post-COVID, but also that there's so few places where you can just be a human being and not be expected to spend money or drink. Which is shocking. You think that would be more important. Anybody else have anything they want to share? Oh, we'll come to you next.
You mentioned a documentary and that kind of got me thinking. I watched a documentary recently called Daughters and it's on Netflix and it's about men who've been incarcerated in the States and they have like young children. So their daughters, it's like there's a program where their daughters get to have a dance at the jail with their dads. So they like decorate it and they provide dresses and they get the girl's hair done and then the dads do like a 6-week parenting course leading up to it about fatherhood and stuff. And it kind of got me thinking about like the idea to have a dance was one of the little girls' ideas like 10 or 15 years ago that kind of like sparked the idea for the program. So maybe like listening to young people and like getting ideas from like, like teenagers or young people who've had experience with like mental health and seeing what they have to say because they're usually like kind of cool new ideas.
It's almost like we've got the perfect group here. But I think you make a good point about how important it is to be joyful. And so much of, I think, our time is spent in survival mode, getting through and surviving the system. And there's something really there about just being in touch with yourself and other people and being happy.
I think that for a lot of us who are creative, artistic in whatever way, like writing, drawing, or even, fabric arts like making clothing or knitting or crocheting. I think that having that connection is so important for our mental health. And I've been thinking about how could we, provide supplies for people who are in the hospital or in, in a situation where they, don't have their craft supplies with them, Cause I remember I was living in Toronto and I had to be in, psych ward, and my friends brought me in my pencil crayons and like printed off things for me to color, and it was just very helpful. So I think that, yeah.
And we do have a lot of supplies because, we did obviously all that seeding work, but I think you're right. Like, I think, I saw a quote once that said that, one thing all humans have in common is a want to create. That's something we all feel inside us in some way. And we need to get it out. We need to let it live.
I wanted to talk about a little bit that social media is a big presence right now. A lot of people are going to social to find resources. And I don't know if any of you here know that Instagram has been kind of changing its ways on how they do things. And there's, a lot of, I guess you could say scams. So I'm trying to find a way to express your small business. And I've done a lot of those little free things, and they kind of sell you things. I'm actually working on something myself, and it's more of a quote page. But I want to expand that and I guess find a different way to have others share their experiences, as well as provide some like worksheets or activities or something. I focus on self-care, self-growth, and confidence.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good reminder to all of us. Like, some of us might have ideas that have been percolating in the back of your head for a while, or even things you've started on. And whether or not they get picked up and move forward as a whole group, you have a community of people to pull on. You want to interview people, you want to do a podcast where people get to highlight their experiences. You have a room of 50 people with amazing, relevant experience. So keep that in mind. Like, people can help build up the ideas you have as well.
Oh, yeah.
There. I'm sorry, it's not that big of a room and I lost you.
Anyways, my hope for today and tomorrow is to try and find more ways to facilitate like this. I do a lot of youth work with the music that I create. I've done like rap camps and do traditional healing with a lot of the youth in my own community, as well as communities across the world. And I really wanted to take a moment to kind of learn from this, try and see a different way to look at it. If there's more opportunities for people to create their art, whether it be through music, through craft, again, like you're saying, through crafting, through drawing, painting, everybody has an artistic ability. They just don't have the facilities that actually support them to bring it out of them. Where I feel like if they had that, or had a place where they could be in a safe and positive atmosphere, that they'd be able to build it together. And like music is the only reason why I'm still alive to stay, and why I'm trying to teach it to the other people around me. So I feel like if there's a way to make that more open to everybody, then it'll create a better space for people to help them. Because it helped me a lot of that.
Well, fantastic comment. And that's a great point to, as you reflect, right? Feel free to go back to this reflection throughout the day as you think, but what are the things that saved you, the things that made a difference in your life? And if that's one of them, maybe it can be for other people as well. You also talked about building skills, having space. So one of the things Minds is going to be doing is supporting your work. So if you need to learn how to do something, we can help you learn it. We can work with you on that. So don't cut things off and think, well, I couldn't do that though, because I don't know this, or I don't have this program, or I don't know how to use this. We can always learn together. And if you want to learn, someone else probably needs to learn too. There's one more over in this corner. Or, oh, sorry.
Yeah, my hopes for today and tomorrow are kind of create more awareness for, just like mental health, like people in crisis. I feel like a lot of people, especially at young ages and, early in school, don't really have like the awareness of the resources around and community, outreach and programs. So yeah, basically just creating more awareness about those programs and community outreach and stuff.
And we got one more over here, but I will say that is a great transition for when we have Renee come up next, because she's gonna be telling us a little bit about our sense making work, about CSI, which is what we're doing today, but also about our theme for the day, which is specifically, let me get the full name of it in the sheet here. Our theme for the day is the lack of service coordination and system navigation. So everything we are doing this weekend is based on that idea, and you hit ahead of it. Yeah, and our last comment.
Okay, so for me, I've noticed, like, I've heard a lot of horror stories from other people, and I just find that most of the crisis lines and places, people are just always worried about, you know, getting the cops called on you, and I think that's one of the really big deterrents and stigmas of why people don't talk and call to services, and I think that there just needs to be a really good integrated way of, like, instead of the cops being called, there is like a support team that has de-escalation training and paramedics, and like, these are the people that it's integrated into the system that, like, if you have a call like this is where it's going, and have like a different sort of crisis response team that is the one taking these calls. I think that'd be good.
I don't think any of us ever want to have to be called next. I think we've all heard lots of horror stories. Sometimes it's the only thing you can do, but it's awful. That's the only thing we feel like we can do. How do we fix that?
I was just gonna say that CMHA actually does do a lot of that. Sometimes they send a crisis team instead of the 911. Yes.
Yeah, so CMHA, for those who didn't hear, CMHA does have a crisis line where they will actually come to you and support you. Is it the CIT team?
And there is a program that CMHA, in conjunction with the hospital and the London Police Services, have started. And it's called COAST, and it's a team, and it does include police officers, but these police officers have been specifically trained to de-escalate and to support people in mental health crisis, not to take a legal or policing approach to them in a traditional way. And they work alongside clinicians from the hospital and CMHA. To do crisis intervention more humanely and supportive. But something that, you know, is still fairly new to our community.
Yeah, and so essential and needed. It's something, again, how many people in this room didn't know about COAST?
I just learned.
There we go, so half. So we think we are all people who are deeply motivated by this, deeply care about this, and only half of us know about it. What about those other people who aren't connected to programs, who are even more isolated and more vulnerable because they don't have a community? How can we help them too? Yeah. So thank you all so much for that reflection. Do take whatever time you need for the weekend to reflect back on who you are, what you want to share, what you want to take and give from this experience. But I think that really aims us great into what Renee's going to bring us through next. So we're actually going to condense 3 of our agenda items together. We're going to talk about collective system innovation, sense making, and Renee's also going to give us our complex challenge brief, and then we will take a break. So she's going to knock that all out in one go. Woo! So as Melissa said, I'm going to start bringing us into really what we're here for today, which is our collective system innovation stream within Minds. So collective system innovation utilizes those principles that Arlene was talking about earlier of mindful social innovation, and it brings them to this room, to the people who are here right now. It's bringing together people who have lived experience in the mental health and addiction care system, system leaders, cross-sectional providers. And the goal is to develop solutions to a specific issue that has been brought forth by the community. So when we think of the social innovation cycle, this is almost like the second step. So I'm going to get into sense making in a bit, which is something that we did with a number of you already. And it's an ongoing process to understand the system. But what we're going to be doing today is taking the information we got from sense making and creating solutions. And solutions specifically that are based on your experiences, what you want to see change, how you would feel to see a success. So we'll get into that. So sense making is literally making sense of the system as like its broadest definition. Essentially, we are looking to understand what that system looks like, the pathways to care, the areas where the system is not working specifically, and where we can interject to make change within that system. So we get this from individuals with lived experiences, diverse perspectives, and throughout the community. So we're looking at like hospital-based programming, community-based programming. We're looking at community members, business, we're talking to police, we're talking to legal resources, we're talking to social workers, we're talking with anyone who touches the system in any way to understand what that system looks like from a diversity of perspectives. And we use this whole systems approach because as much as we think often of mental health care as occurring in a hospital or clinical setting, it's much more than that. It's about our entire community system working together. So sense-making activities can be pretty broad. Some of the ones that we've used in our lab is reviewing academic literature, so we know what's already out there. We do systems mapping, which is a process of looking at everything in the system. So you take, say, St. Joseph's Healthcare and all of the programs that are within that system. How do you enter those programs? How are people accessing those services? What does that look like? How is it then related to programming at CMHA, at YU? How do all of those things interact? And where are we finding breakdowns in those pathways, places that we can actually make a change, or where people are maybe falling through and not receiving the care that they need? We also do surveys, interviews, which I know a number of you in this room have done with me, and then artistic-based approaches. So a few different ways that we've done that. One is this tree that we have here, which essentially is a really quick activity we do with people where they're able to put on the green side of the tree things that are working well in the system, and then the blue is the water, so what's actually allowing those things to thrive and work well. And then our decaying side of the tree is what's not working well, and the gray is what's feeding into that. And the one that most of you are probably familiar with are RZs, where we have people come together and share their mental health care journeys, what they see is working well in the system, what's not working, and most importantly, like what they want to see change. And they do that in a variety of ways. It creates like a little magazine. So we took all of this information from all of these sources, and we found 6 main themes that were coming out. Each of these themes is going to be the topic of a collective system innovation coming up. We're going to be focusing on one today, as Melissa said, which is the lack of service coordination and system navigation. Others ones that came out were homelessness and housing stability, which I don't think is surprising to anybody. This is one of the main issues that we're seeing in our community. And that's one that we'll be working closely with others who are already working on that, so that we're not duplicating effort and we're not overtaxing individuals who are already sharing their stories or making change in that area. The other is a lack of resources for substance use and addictions, or a lack of awareness of the resources that do exist. Being denied service for being too well or too ill. And this is often just based on how somebody's presenting in the moment, not necessarily how they indicate they're actually feeling. A lack of interim and proactive approaches to care, so the time in between appointments, the time between a referral and your first appointment, what's happening in that time. A lot of the times the answer currently is not a whole lot. And then lack of compassion and humanity from care providers. As Arlene mentioned at the beginning, we're also seeing a lot of care providers who are burnt out. And as a result, those who may deeply care are almost going numb and providing care the best they can, but they're burning out themselves. They don't have to give. And then there are others who just aren't willing to engage in that understanding, that kindness, that compassion, and that's something that we need to build back into our provision of care. So specifically for today, I want you to take some time throughout this process to really think about your experiences in the system as it relates to this idea of being able to navigate the system or how you're able to access services. So what we want to do is develop new solutions that address issues that you've personally experienced, that you think others are personally experiencing, so that we can create a better pathway to care. So we see a lot of lack of integration of services. A big issue around this, as is noted by a lot of different agencies, is funding pockets. So people have specific funding, it's difficult for them to coordinate with one another because of that. But it's also about people not knowing what exists in different organizations. So everybody's got a little bit of piecemeal information about the different services that are offered in the community, but it's difficult to actually determine where someone goes and how you actually get there. So things like someone who needs a psychiatrist, you need a referral, you can't self-refer often to psychiatry programs, but there are certain programs like FEMAP that you can self-refer to. But your average person who's experiencing crisis or in the need of help might not have that information. And a lot of the individuals who are actually working in the system themselves don't have that information. One of the psychiatrists that I spoke to who had recently started at St. Joe's, when they started, they were just given a sheet of paper with a list of different resources. And that was their introduction to the system in London, which is obviously not even close to what we actually have here. So, where did they go? But we don't need the other slides. So a big issue is that people who are working in the field aren't aware of the services that other organizations offer. They're trying to find the right resources for patients, but they don't know where to send them. We also see this with a number of the individuals who I interviewed and spoke with who had family members or friends or loved ones who were navigating that system. They themselves say as a nurse, as a frontline care provider, they didn't know how to navigate our system. So if someone who works in the system isn't able to navigate the system, how is somebody who's outside of that system supposed to navigate it? We also don't know what's going to happen in terms of the delays and waits. So someone finally gets into a pathway, so they've been given a referral, but the referral is a 6-month wait. You're looking at a 6-month wait, it's not really a referral, it's just kind of pushing you along. How many people fall through at that point, continue to get worse during that time, aren't receiving the care that they need during that time. So now this referral isn't actually an appropriate referral, they need to be referred somewhere else. And we actually had one Z participant who said when they went to get help, they were just confused because the first time they tried to get help, the hospital didn't know how to help. So they're going to the place they know to get help, and the hospital says, well, I don't know what to do with you, and they're released back in. And then one of the biggest issues that we see, particularly with like our younger generation, is people are developing difficulties with their mental health in the pediatrics with less than 18. And then they get a great caseworker, they have a psychiatrist they're working with, they have everything all set up, they're doing great. They turn 18 and they have to transition into the adult care. When you do that transition, a lot of those pathways, those people that you were working with are no longer available to you. And we don't actually have like a caseworker whose job it is to help somebody to navigate that. And it's noted that we do have that for physical ailments. There are people who help connect you to different resources, things that people need. We don't have that within our mental health care and addiction care system currently. And it's something that we need to look at. So as we're looking at moving toward all of you in this room taking your experience, which is so rich and so deep, to develop a solution, I want you to start thinking about some questions, some things you want to reflect on. We're thinking about what are these solutions and what do they look like. So first, we want to know what resources do we already have. And I think, as I noted, part of the problem is we don't know what resources we have. So part of it is beginning to understand that. And I'm hoping our panel that's coming up later will be able to talk a bit about that as well. And how do those resources work? The other is, what are the main barriers? A lot of the time barriers are wait times, a lot of the time barriers are things like needing a referral, that type of thing. So anything that you've experienced as a barrier to receiving care, what was that? How could we address that? What's a way that we could actually make change in the system so that when you want care, you're able to receive the care that you need? What does successful change look like? So if you are developing a new program, a new app, a new, like a podcast, whatever it is that you want to develop through the work that we're doing, what would let you know that you have created change in the way that you want to see change in the system? So what are your end goals with what you're looking at? And how do we actually change the system? So if we create something here today, how do we make sure it actually gets into the system and is creating change, not just for the individuals who have access to this one specific thing, but how do we get it to permeate within the system so that it becomes a part of that fabric, so that we don't have individuals who are falling through the cracks, who aren't able to navigate the system. Oh, there's those. There they are. So these are zines, for those of you who may not have seen them. So these are just some examples of the zines that we had from our zine participants that really highlight this system navigation piece. So you can see here, this individual is it time yet? I'm ready to heal. So we talked about this, these wait lists. People are ready and they can't access the service when they need it. Lack of awareness of programs that exist in the city is a big one, or how those programs connect to one another. And also just general lack of accessibility of programs. So you might be aware a program exists, but you can't get there, and you're not aware of resources, say like free taxi services or programs that might be set up that assist with transportation so that you can physically access the programs that you would like to be in. And then no support while waiting services, wait lists, how bad is it? So we're seeing a lot of this. A lot of people talked about the wait lists, how long they were, how it meant that they weren't receiving care when they needed it. And a lot of this stuff, even when you're paying out of pocket, has a wait list. Most psychologists in the city have wait lists, and you're going to be waiting a long time. And that's out of pocket, or if you're lucky through insurance. So if you're looking at something that's actually covered by OHIP, the wait lists are even longer. We'll leave that there. I think we're going to take a little break. So yeah, yep. Oh. Grace, you have the phone?
That said, I was just wondering, how do you change? How can we create change when there's like set policies, that are in place where you can't really, you're in a waiting list or something like that. Like you can't really do anything.
I think what we want to do is try to think of something that there's policies in place. That doesn't mean they have to stay the way that they are. We want to think of ways that we can actually disrupt that. And that's, I think, what we're hoping to get from the experience of individuals in this room. Like, what would that look like to you?
Policies and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that could be a solution. If you want to change the policy, you can do it by creating a policy brief. Whatever it is, right? Like your solution is a solution that makes sense to you and addresses the need as you're seeing it.
I see.
Stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
So for example, it'd be like, why does that wait list exist in the first place? What are the reasons why this wait list keeps getting perpetuated? Are there things that we can do to eliminate the wait list? Like, let's start like thinking, what would our system look like that didn't have any wait lists? How do we get there? You know, what's in place that we've all just taken for granted? Oh yeah, there's always wait lists, there's always, oh, we can't. No, like, let's try to imagine a system that there is no wait list. What would we have to do to make it look like that.
Like, I understand that they don't want to have like just people flooding in terms of like, you know, too many bodies for, the amount of people that we have in staff or something like that. Like, I understand that, but, in the same light, it's still kind of, a little bit selfish, like, to prioritize, staff over the people in need.
Well, this is how we can start thinking about it, though. Maybe some mental health support that you need doesn't have to come from a psychiatrist. Maybe the mental health support you could, you need to get better, or just to get you to a place where you can maybe engage in more intensive treatment, can come from somebody else, right? So like, how do we use all of our resources in a more effective way? So it's trying to get out of our ways of doing right now and say, well, it's not working, so let's not try to like make little changes to something that's not working. Let's step away and go, what would a system look like without weights? What would we have to do? Where would we have to put resources different? Because it's true, we might not be able to create tons of new resources, but can we use the resources we currently have way more effectively?
Okay.
We know the conventional approach isn't working for people, the traditional approach isn't working, so the goal is to create something new, novel, something that's actually going to make change and doesn't rely necessarily on those more traditional approaches that people are saying are not working.
Couple of us were just discussing that, to rely on maybe systems that are already in place is sort of a transition between fixing it and relieving that, stress on people who are seeking services. So if you're on that waiting list, like be referred to peer support, or be referred to a case manager, a transitional case manager, if you are on that brink of being transitioned out from youth to adult, so that there is that interim part, that middle part that people can access. And then when you're looking at peer support, you're looking at the community itself, right? And CMHA, I think, has peer support. And a lot of communities, I know, like the LGBTQ plus community has, just like we innately peer support each other, as somebody who does. I do peer support, in my communities. And, I think that can help relieve some of that stress, because as people have already noted, that the system is tapped, it is stressed, and the workers that are there are stressed, pulled to the, like, as far as they can go. So we rely on other people that, like you said, that may not necessarily be, you know, clinically trained or have a degree, but they have their own knowledge base. And I think that that's so important to just rely on other people's knowledge base, because sometimes it's really nice just to hear from somebody that knows what you're going through and can actually know what you're going through. Because when you're talking to a professional, they may say that they know what you're going through, but you don't necessarily believe that because they're, they're just saying that because they're a professional. You don't really know their lived experience unless they disclose that.
Absolutely. I think we saw that coming out in a lot of the work too, that people wanted to see representation of individuals who had lived experience in mental health care system, someone who genuinely could understand what they were feeling and could truly empathize in a way that someone who hasn't had that experience may not be able to do, no matter how hard they try. And social support, we know, is one of the best protective factors for mental health difficulties. It's also one of the things related to individuals doing better
doing well with treatment. So how do we get people in touch more with those social supports, those natural social supports, and the ones that might exist in community organizations, like you said, with crisis lines at CMHA or other places. But I think, again, that comes back to system navigation to a degree. So you get a referral. Maybe with that referral also then comes referrals to these internal supports, these other individuals who might be able to support you as you're waiting for care. And maybe that's something that exists to a degree. Maybe we need to bolster that. Maybe we need to create more. And it is something for our particular program here, as Melissa mentioned, we're doing events throughout over the next number of months for people who are doing this work to come together and have each other to lean on and to learn.
Sorry. I was going to say, one of the things that we're talking about obviously is the lack of connection and communication between agencies and in terms of just the knowledge base in general. And we have people in our communities who hold a lot of that knowledge from experience going through those resources, from experience of having to step up and become a peer support themselves, from things within the community. And yet there are so many barriers to being able to actually work in a field like this where we can advocate and support. I'll give the example of I went to school for Human Services Foundations. I completed my diploma. I got into social service work and it was completely inaccessible. It was inequitable. There was no way for me to get through the program, not because I wasn't competent, but because the demand and the lack of accommodations in that specialty. And they say it said because it was due to regulations, but the lack of flexibility and accessibility meant that folks like me can't get into those positions. And I know there's so many people here with this kind of knowledge in their own communities. You know, we have Indigenous folks here who have a lot of knowledge of resources within their own communities. We have folks here I know who run organizations for different marginalized communities within their communities. And a lot of us don't have access to that education and have many barriers in the way. So I think maybe one of the things that can help systems navigation is to create roles that don't have that barrier of entry, that barrier of having this piece of paper, that barrier of having this grade or having a driver's license, or all of these barriers where your most marginalized members of your populations with some of the most experience in navigating a lot of these things are the people who are out sleeping on the streets, are the people who are sleeping on their friends' couches, are the people who are, you know, helping hold the hands of other people in their community.
Um, like recently when I think about mental health and how best I can get support, I usually think about see how we have psychiatrists and social workers and counselors, and it's hard to relate to them because they don't have family members that went through mental health or addiction. Maybe they do, but most of them don't, or they don't have the whole mental health experiences. I feel like there were more people with mental health and addictions who overcame their mental health addictions, and they go into like counseling, social psychiatry, and like they have their own experiences possible, and it'll be much better. Like it won't be better, but like they can be able to relate to them, and they'll be able to understand you more deeply. Like, that's what I always think about. Like for me as a person who went through mental health issues, and I was studying psychology at Kips before I had my health issues. I want to go back even more now to help people like me, and the experience I went through can help more people.
They want to bring more lived experience in the system to help others within the system, and it's about helping to break down barriers for individuals who may have experienced mental health crisis to be able to get back into those systems. They can become sort of psychiatrist, whatever that would look like, because they would be have that personal knowledge that would be helpful for individuals as well.
Hello. Earlier, we were talking about how broken the system is. I feel like the only way to fix the system is, or make it better, is to find a model, like another country or city, and try to like see what they're doing right, and like look at statistics and see how like things change, how like let's say wait times in emergency room changed, and try and model it and make our mental health systems better.
That's absolutely something that we would want to see being done as part of the work for developing these new initiatives and interventions, is looking at what is being done well elsewhere. And how can we bring that into our system? How can we disrupt our system to fit something that is actually working?
So on the barrier for people to enter working in this field as well, it's not just the physical barriers that there are, but as well as the barriers for those who also have lived experience with mental health issues. I personally know somebody who was doing the courses to become a social service worker, and he ended up dropping out because during his co-op, he had to work with somebody that he previously knew, and the organization he was doing the co-op at refused to let him to pass on the working with that person to somebody else. And this happened multiple times before he finally said no and ended up dropping out of the course completely. And this is something that I've heard from other people too, that's happened to them. And I feel like it's such a shame that people who are so invested in wanting to actually help are being pushed out that way.
I was just gonna say, I can relate to that. I knew someone that was, in school for their BSW, and when it came to their, placement, they were on their last placement, and they were doing like all the paperwork, and they're doing really well with their mental health. It was actually someone that works for CMHA, and, as a peer support worker. And they like went back in their mental health history and tried to tell them they couldn't do their placement because they weren't well enough or they weren't stable enough. And tried to like, they eventually got to do their placement, but it was like a real fight because they tried to prove that they weren't well enough to do their placement. It was like, this was years ago that she was struggling with like her mental health that bad, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on what a lot of folks have been saying. I was working as a crisis line counselor and doing my master's in counseling. And then that's disrupted by an episode of psychosis that happened for the first time. And I've had a personally really positive experience with the PEP program, and that my case manager and psychiatrist have been really amazing at helping me advocate for accommodation so that I can return to that work with all this experience. So yeah, I think like these accommodations so that folks are able to participate with all of that valuable knowledge is really important. And when case managers and psychiatrists can help us to get those accommodations, that's really
just wanted to touch on like youth homelessness. Because I experienced homelessness for like a year last year, and I was in the youth shelter that is run by like YU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited. And I would like to see more like addiction and mental health help in the shelter, because there's not a lot of that there, and like try to figure out how to integrate that into it. The YAC, which is the Youth Action Center, has a lot of resources for like homeless youth, like food and like hygiene products and stuff. But it's also hard for the shelter youth to even get downtown because we don't get bus tickets and stuff. So I think it's just really important that there's more awareness of like how hard it actually is when you're, because the youth shelter is on 585 like Clark Road, and like that's like really far from like all the resources that are downtown. So I just think that it needs to be easier for like the shelter kids, because there's like really not a lot of like hope when you're in there, and it's really hard to like access resources properly because it's not talked about there at all. But yeah.
So I had a similar experience to, what someone else brought up, the master's program. And, so I started last September and I had a, mental health episode. I experienced a manic episode, and, instead of like providing support for me, the professors asked me to take the rest of the year off and then restart completely this year. So I didn't get any, like I didn't get a refund on my tuition or any of my credits, even though my grades were like, I think I had 94 average or something. So anyways, I just think that within programs, there's like that are going to be helping people with their mental health, there should also be mental health support for the students in those programs as well. And I was also thinking there's a lot of people who want to volunteer and help in the mental health field, but they're not getting paid for it. Like with CMHA's supportive listening line, I think the training could be better. And I also think that if people are putting in that time and effort, they should be compensated for it, because it is real work. And you shouldn't have to go to school for like 4 to 6 years just to be able to like give peer support or help people. Yeah.
I think, if we can tackle like schools earlier on, just to prevent, just future crisis situations, in the future for, students, I think that would be like, an ideal kind of situation, and yeah, basically that.
About systems transformation, it's probably not just one approach, right? It's a multi-pronged approach. We can't just address what's happening now. We need to address what we anticipate happening in the future. We need to address, as you said, maybe proactive approaches so that we don't have as many people who are needing the systems that are in place currently. So you have to address the individuals who are in the system now, how to best serve them and how to help protect people from developing difficulties where they need to access those services. So we want to look at an approach that's going to encompass all of this. It's not going to be one thing that's going to change the entire system.
Right now with our panel, so we're gonna, this panel's gonna be for about an hour, and we're gonna build upon the topic of service coordination and system navigation within the mental health and addiction space. And everything that has been expressed before this was excellent, and thank you so much for raising your questions, raising your experiences. This is what we want to bring to the table today. And as part of our panel, we have two lovely panelists who are here to help share their insights and to engage in this conversation. And I love all those questions you had asked. I want to bring them up again. We'll have our panelists answer them. So I want to first introduce Megan McFloyd, who is a youth mental health worker for the Chippewas of Defense. And then Ernest Zelkovich, who is the clinical specialist for the prevention and early intervention program for psychosis, in other words, PEP. So I'm going to let Megan and Ernest introduce a little bit more about their role and their experience of working in the system. And then we'll get, and I'll explain a little bit more about the structure of the panel right after. So, Ernest.
So fun. So I was just explaining to Daphne, actually, I've had a migraine for the last 2 days, so I'm here. I'm here. Yeah, just trying to get through the day of migraine hangover, if anyone knows what that is, it's a thing. So I've been working for Chippewas of the Thames, First Nation for 7 years now as mental health youth, sort of youth mental health worker. So I started out in the position as a youth mental health worker, and since then it's sort of moved into the supervisor as I advocated for the fact that we need more than one mental health worker working and supporting the youth of the nation. So I've been there, a lot of advocating throughout the years. I mean, if you don't work in mental health, especially again, so for youth, specifically my role is 13 to 25 years old. So if you're not someone who's working in the youth mental health field, it's a lot of advocating on behalf of the young people and supporting them and empowering them to advocate for themselves, because again, you're not in the mental health field, you don't really know what is needed or what's going on for the young people. A lot of the times, I just want to say, for example, the Road to Mental Health program, the taxi service that just started through Minds. Round of applause for that, because I cannot tell you how many times I've had to meet in the last couple of weeks supporting young people to get here and there from the community for really important things they need life-wise. But it's really difficult when you're not, again, working in mental health. So I think these conversations are incredible to have because we need more advocates, and we need more people saying these young people cannot necessarily make that call for themselves if they're scared that the person on the other end is going to say, no, we need a caseworker to call, case closed, end of story. It's things like that. So in a big part, that's a lot of my role, is really getting to know the young people in the community and advocating and supporting them to empower them in whatever way that they need. So that's been my role for the last 7 years. They needed a trades program. They were interested in finding out more about the trades. They made that happen. That sort of shifted my position for an entire year to support them in understanding more what that looked like. And that was a huge success. And I'd love to talk more about that whenever anybody has time. But for me right now, it really is going through, since that time, I've been trained as a trauma therapist as well. And my next project is getting horses and equine therapy connected with the youth for the community, because they just offer such a huge possibility with wellness and healing for young people who might find it hard to verbalize what's going on inside. So I don't know what I just said for the last 5 minutes, but you're welcome.
First of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming. You guys are our future leaders, and I'm willing to do whatever I can to support you guys, because at the end of the day, you guys are going to be leading this world, and I'm very happy to see everybody here today, and everything you guys talked about, you nailed it, everything, right? And absolutely love the crowd today. So applause for everyone. So my name is Ernest Zelkovich, and I work for the London Health Sciences PEP program, which is the early intervention program for psychoses. And the reason I work for this program is that I had a psychotic episode back in 2009, which I recovered from, which also inspired a career in social work. And so here I am today. I wear a lot of hats in this program. I take a lot of the guys to the YMCA because I believe that there's more than medications and counseling. In terms of wellness, I meet a lot of the people in our program out in the community. So I really think that people get well in the community, not in the doctor's office. I do a lot of presentations in the community on our program. I do a lot of speaking around sharing my story to reduce mental health stigma. We have a solid wraparound program. We have social work case managers, nurse case managers, psychiatrists, psychologists, rehab therapists. Who else? I probably forgot some of these. When they hear this later, they're gonna give me some shit for it. We just have a very solid wraparound program, and I love our program because we don't just focus on the signs and symptoms. We really focus on the quality of life. So yeah, and I look forward to answering more questions on the spot.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Megan and Ernest as well for introducing yourself. And on behalf of Minds, we're very grateful to have both of you here today to talk to our community and to really engage in conversation. And yeah, so I'm just going to explain just a little bit about the structure of our panel. So like I said, it's about an hour, but we're going to have 2 questions. And for each question, each of our panelists are going to answer, for about a total of 10 minutes. And then afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A for about 15 minutes. So, during this time when you are listening, feel free to just jot down the questions that you have and you would like to ask our panelists. And it's going to be the same format for the second question as well that is asked. So, all right, so let's start with the first question. So I'll start off with Megan. Can you describe what is currently in the system in terms of what are the types of tools that exist and what are the things that we need to develop so that we can enable transparency and accessibility of services that exist in hospital as well as in community? So I'll give the mic to you.
All right, so when I think about that question and when I was actually trying to wrap my brain around that question, and thank you again for healing up this wonderful group of young people. I apologize I was not here. I'm on vacation next week and I had a whole bunch to catch up on today and get taken care of, including making sure lots of young people are safe and good for the next little bit. So thinking about that question, I honestly feel like when I'm trying to navigate through this system as someone serving clients, I can't imagine what it must look like for other young people just doing it on their own. Because for me, I think what system? There is no real system that's in place that even supports, again, caseworkers or different people that are in the area to support young people with how to access different spaces and places. I would think that for sure housing is such a pain in the ass to try to navigate. And that's just with really recent experiences of trying to find a space that is safe for a young person. There's about 4 or 5 right now that I'm looking for. And it's just really challenging. So when it comes to housing, when it comes to addictions, when it comes to just finding a mental health counselor that is someone that's outside of, the community where I am, to support the young people that are not either in the community or need something more than just myself and my team. It's really challenging. What I've thought oftentimes is what would really be wonderful is if there was some sort of, and it's funny that it's called a minds map, because it's a mind map of what services exist. So for example, it was years ago when this was talked about, but something that would be really key would be, what are you looking for today? Even an interactive app or something like that, where, what are you looking for today? Services for housing, for what age group? Immediate housing, long-term housing, transitional housing, and then just moving from there with what do you need next? A lot of the times when we're looking into even crisis numbers, a lot of the times as frontline workers, we have to, I don't know about yourself, but for me, make sure you call those numbers and say, hey, just wanted to know how this actually works and if it's even still in service. Because a lot of those phone numbers, sometimes they're just not connected to anyone anymore. So it's really, it would be really helpful if there was some service out there that actually kept up on those resources in the community, or there was an app or some sort of service developed to navigate you through, like a systems navigation person or app, to navigate you through all of those questions step by step, which would make it again easier and more empowering for the young people doing it, instead of needing to sort of rely on that frontline caseworker to support them with that navigating. It's a scary world out there, and when you're on it, when you're in it on your own for the first time, where you need that kind of supports, or you're having some mental health issues, I mean, you need those services to be clear and those resources to be accessible. So just a tool of some sort. I don't know if you want to get in on that. That's what I came up with for my thought, for in my head for the first. Right, and so the other day, actually, another example is I went to YOU, and we had a tour of the space. I was blown away at all of the services they have to offer that I didn't know existed at all. And like I've said, I've been in the mental health field for, you know, over 10 years. So for me, just to be blown away at the fact that this exists and it's exactly what I need for the young people right now, but to not know that that was out there. It's being able to make use of all of the different access to services out there instead of just the main ones you know about. Like, oh, I'm gonna send you to this person because I know that they're trustworthy and that they're good and they're gonna take you with a warm welcome. Again, that's another big piece of it, right? To have that warm handoff and to have those people out there and those services and resources that you can trust as a frontline worker, because you know, those are your babies. You don't want to just send them off to someone who's gonna break that trust like that and you're back to square one. So.
Some of the things I've noticed over the years, and again, I hate bringing up the pandemic, but it had a significant impact on everybody, on us, our parents, our loved ones, everybody else. And in the sense that this was probably the first global problem we were asked to solve a problem by staying apart. And I think that's very difficult, right? So from that came a lot of isolation. With more isolation, there came a lot of video games. And video games are great, just not 24/7, right? But online gaming, online relationships, things just became unsustainable, right? And really what I see nowadays is that there's a lack of human connection, a lack of compassion. I think people are just taking the easy route nowadays. You know, I'd rather send a text message than see the person in person. But it's very important. I'm noticing that we are very much disconnected as a community. And following the pandemic, you know, something we also can't avoid, the inflation, the cost of living, right? Young people, you guys are drowning. I'm standing up for you. I don't think, you know, you guys all deserve a wage that can afford your roof over the home, that you can have good food on your table. All of those things are very important, right? So people are drowning in debt, they're losing hope, and a lot of the policies that are made in place to destigmatize or help people are very much often made by the people that don't have that lived experience or have the power but don't care. And I say this blatantly because we're seeing it everywhere, right? Our young people are struggling very much. You talked about housing. I mean, our inpatient units are drowning with housing issues. We don't know what to do. We don't know where to send them. We also don't want to keep them long because we're restricting their freedom. We also don't want to discharge them to the streets because they're going to relapse. So what do? It's always that fine balance, right? We see the social determinants of health drowning people. And from a systems perspective, you know, from the very top, if you had your natural supports, they're probably working a little bit more. They're a little bit more stressed out. Guess what? You're not spending as much time with your strengths and support systems. So now you're reaching out to something else that doesn't exist. So now you're feeling confused and lost, and it just trickles down, right? And I think our priorities, a lot of our priorities should be around safety and physiological being. Because without that, we really can't meet any higher level goals. And I think we all need to speak up around, just the inflation. You know, I think we covered earlier on that our mental health workers, frontline workers are drowning, and they are, same reason for inflation. And I think the other piece that's very important, to mention, we've gotten too much into risk management, in the sense that, at least the mental health areas at the hospital are considered high-risk areas, but according to all of the adverse events reporting, we are actually the lowest risk area. So sometimes we actually stigmatize within our own system, right? And I think that's something important to bring up, because if we don't actually reduce that stigma, we actually can't move forward as a society.
Thank you so much, Megan and Ernest, for your insights on that. And I think there's a lot of things that have been shared in terms of how difficult it can be to navigate the system when, you know, we're trying, or when there isn't maybe enough support in place for workers who are in the system, but you know, clarity for themselves. And I do believe, and I think we can agree that if the people who are in the system have clarity, then it is something that can help out with patients who do need to receive care and who need that better kind of navigation. But also the thing that also stood out to me as well is that if we're even trying to navigate the system, if you are trying to point out, and if there is a wait list or there's, you know, something that can't cater to that kind of need, what do you do? So, yeah, so anyways, I'm going to pass the floor to our audience. We have about 15 minutes or so, or 10 to 15 minutes on the Q&A. So, does anyone have some questions? And I'm gonna have Grace pass the mic around and bring it back.
Hi, I have a question for Megan. I have a question in regards to a client of mine I used to support, used to be on my caseload. He's 25, Indigenous, suffers from extreme trauma, mental health concerns. And I'd love to hear more about what services I can offer him, or the taxi service he finds, or even the question therapy. He might be open to it, but it's just hard for us to even get him to like leave his residence. Is where we're at right now. So I'm just wondering if you have any sort of feedback or resources that I could offer him.
First, so again, that's a really tricky question. So, the first thing I would probably need to know is what their background, what their band is, like where their community, or yeah. So if they're, yeah. So it can be really tricky, because I mean, when they're coming, sometimes a lot of the times what happens in these urban areas is we have young people coming from different First Nations from across, you know, Canada sometimes, or Ontario, and connecting into that First Nation is difficult. For Chippewa, fortunately, there's support no matter if you live in the city or in Chippewa, so that support is there. There's a lot more opportunities, and I don't know if you've connected with services in London already. So at LOSA would be the first one I would mention. At LOSA, yeah, at LOSA, I think we have someone maybe that's working with that LOSA today. But I see the Okanagan shirt. The other piece I would think would be to Nemrick Friendship Center. That's for London, Nemrick Friendship Center. So again, just right now, even as I say that, she's writing that down, and that's a great question. But if there's a young Indigenous person in the community, we should have somewhere to put down Indigenous, yeah, in the community needs support. Boom, boom, you know, Nemrick at LOSA. And that's not to shame or blame you at all. It's just the reality is you're a frontline worker, and it's navigating this system. Doesn't really exist, I don't think. and trying to figure out where can we find support for these young people. So in the community, Chippewa community, we have a whole bunch of different supports. And now this Road to Mental Health program that mine started is, I believe it's up to the age of 25. So 16 to 25, and it's a taxi service. So I believe that it would be able to support this young person, again, to access supports in their community. It's for rural youth, to access supports in their community. So if there was a support program happening, say Tuesday at 5 p.m., well, variety, he could go and attend that, right? And just start to feel reconnected. Whatever different things are happening in the community, it would be a free taxi ride to those events, to that programming, to reconnect in there with the community, with the services, but also definitely support through connecting with those programs they have there, Never Friendship Center. I think that isolation again is a huge issue for a lot of young people, and that's really across the board for all young people. And it's getting them out, and sometimes just finding that person to say, I'm gonna go with you, you know, and I know a lot of frontline workers do that. It's that warm. I mean, there was a young person that took a cab here today. I think he had to go home. Probably it was a little bit overwhelming because I wasn't able to make it a little bit earlier. But I mean, it's sometimes just walking beside them. And I'm like a true firm believer that if we could have those supports that are people we trust, you know, because sometimes we're not able to go and walk beside them for that day and bring them to that appointment. But I mean, even just to connect with me, to connect with this young man who works for Atlosa maybe, or just attends programming, I don't know, we'll have to find out later. Just being able to make that contact and say, hey, I have this young person, I'd like to connect them with the programming services we have there. So I think just a broader way of us all connecting together, you know, and you having that contact to say, oh, you're from this community, let's call them up, let's find out what do they have. And even just making that scheduled visit to say, hey, come on out, let's see what sort of programming opportunity we have there. So I'd love to connect and chat more, make those networking connections, right? But man, wouldn't an app be so great? An AI app that's super smart, knows what you need next. But yeah, I hope that helped a little bit, for sure. Yeah.
Bonjour, Annie. I'm Zach Overbridge. I'm from Chippewa First Nation. I'm a Indigenous music representative there, also a rap camp facilitator for the own endeavors I do for youth. And I was curious, you run the Chippewa Youth page. Have you talked about that? I think we've talked. Yeah, that would be me. Oh, okay. So okay. So one of the things I was gonna ask, kind of involving that event, was would the taxi service go to the youth of Chippewas in London as well? Because a lot of this event is based on is having the youth helping their mental health, having representation from different cultures, involving the Indigenous culture, while also being able to represent their own art. So it's not only just the music that we represent, it's also the we have crocheting, we have drawing, different types of art forms that we're trying to represent, because a lot of these guys need a outlet for. And I was just curious if a lot of people from London feel like they can't make it out to these type of events. Is there a way that taxi service to go to them?
London, Melissa, maybe.
I snuck around the back. So the Road to Mental Health, which you mentioned, there's actually been some changes to it to make it easier to use. So first off, we used to have to call or reach out. They would help process you. They call it taxi. So we're now being very open with it. So you can call and make your own appointment or thing. Really, it's anything that is mental health addiction related. So if it's going to help get to an appointment, get to a crisis call, that's what saved. Or and again, 15 to 26. Great. And then specifically for the Indigenous piece, The expansion for that is actually underway, so we actually have some of our drivers trained in Sanya training, so anti-impression training. And it goes both ways for them, so if they are living in the city and wanna go to Chippewa to receive services, that's appropriate, that counts, and vice versa. Yeah, as long as it's culturally relevant, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. This is for Ernest as well. So you were speaking about like the wage increases for the people here. Personally, I've seen, and just like statistically wise, like the increase of wages is usually a thing that increases everything, and a lot of that doesn't really help. I feel like the main thing should be the decrease of food prices and housing prices. Which isn't an easy task for anybody, but is that something that you've brought up to a federal level? Because like, for example, like I live in a native housing community that's geared to income, and at least I know half, including myself, like I'm at risk for it, and half of the people that used to live there for years, they can't live there anymore because the geared to income is so high because they base it off the gross income. And most of them now have to move out or move to somewhere else, or move back to communities where they are at risk to certain things because of the housing crisis and because they're raising everything right now. So is there any way that you brought it to a federal level to kind of try and make that change?
Yeah, just to answer your question, and maybe I should have clarified, like really what I'm talking about, making enough money to survive, right? To survive comfortably so that you're not pursuing, 5 years of education and living on Ontario works, right? That's what I mean. So whether it's an adjustment on your raises or, decreasing food prices, at the end of the day, we need to be out of a survival mode to reach higher level goals. To answer your second question around going to the federal government, I wish I could. I got 2 little toddlers. They are busy, man. And you know what? I hope that through this event, maybe we can collectively, whatever it is that we figure out here, bring forward some of the pieces that we discussed and highlighted. That's why I came here today, because there's strength in numbers, and I can't do it on my own, especially when I have 2 toddlers.
I actually have a question regarding some of the indigenous things. I am not native in my blood or anything, but I do appreciate culture and different ways of healing and holistically as well. I'm wondering if there is any flexibility for people who still want to participate, but yet don't, like, I guess, label themselves as indigenous.
That's a great question. I am as white and Scottish as they come, so just to clear that up right away. No way, I mean, I'm native to Scotland, that's what I am. But that's a really great question. For the role that I have in the community, it is for Chippewa community members, so sometimes we collaborate back and forth for different events with Oneida Nation. But I'm not sure if there's ever any opportunities for non-natives to engage in different things. I believe they're white, again, through LOSA, Family Healing Services. I believe they do have Peace Park. They do have a lot of different events that take place. So when they'll put up a teepee and they'll have some, like a sacred fire going, I believe that they do say it's open to everyone and anyone to go and to learn and to understand and start sort of, I guess, not taking it on as your own, but just respecting and learning, because it is all about, we have 3 First Nation communities really close by, and it is really a sign of respect to
again, walk beside them and understand what their cultures and practices are, because they are all very different. Let me tell you, I know nothing about Oneida. I'm a Anishinaabe, I got it 7 years later, I'm good. But there's always, you know, it's very nice to have that open heart to know that you'd like to understand, to be able to respect that, those different cultures and support your brothers and sisters there, so. But yeah, there is at Nemer Friendship Center again, and at LOSA, again, I always encourage people, to walk in the front door and say, hey, I'm just wondering if there's ever any opportunities for non-Indigenous people to partake in different events and things going on. You might come across a lot of opportunities, right? Because being an ally and being that person that supports those First Nations too, and the Indigenous, people of this country, it's really important. So thank you for asking that question. That's an awesome question.
If I could just get the details, that'd be great.
Oh, do you get the details? Well, let me just text you. Maybe there's gonna be an app for that soon, actually. Yeah, I can get you. I mean, again, Zach's over here. I'm just making you the representative of that LOSA today. But yeah, so I can connect you with for sure with the details after that. We can get you connected.
And I do see an individual back over there as well. If you don't mind, we're gonna go into the second question, but what I will do is we can ask questions maybe at the end, maybe you can definitely ask the questions you need. So we're gonna go, and so we'll start off with this question, and it's really more about the action items of our community. So the question is, how do you see members of our community playing a greater role in this creative innovation space for developing or advancing tools and resources that can help with the transparency of what exists and how to access those services?
So one of the things that I learned about our client population is that a third of our clients struggle with a lot of stigma, self-internalized stigma. And the issue with that is that, they lose hope in the process, their self-esteem, they stop participating in all sorts of activities. And I would say one of the most important things that you can actually do is reduce mental health stigma. And there's little ways that you can do that on a daily basis, right? So if you're ever invited to some sort of an event and you really want to go and you decide not to go because you feel like you're not worthy of going, or you think that people think of you less, in fact, you're actually contributing to the stigma, right? And so what I would really encourage people is that, use some appropriate self-disclosure, just like we are here today, right? Everybody has some sort of a struggle. There isn't a person on this earth who has not had a mental health struggle. It's not a secret, right? And one of the things that I found helpful at the hospital level is that I use a lot of appropriate self-disclosure, right? So what I was talking about earlier on, about the post-pandemic, how we became increasingly disconnected and divided. One of the ways that I feel service providers can really connect with their clients is to use some appropriate self-disclosure. Because like I said, we all have had some struggles. And why that's important is that we start to build a therapeutic alliance together, right? I'm doing this work because I have a passion for it. I have a lived experience with it. I came here as a refugee. There's clearly a trauma history in why I do this work, right? So there's a part of me that wants to tackle this with you together, right? And I think the more that we use appropriate self-disclosure, the more we realize this is a system problem and we are the system. So if we are the system, we got to remember not to contribute to our own stigma, not to contribute to the system's stigma. And yeah.
That's really great. I also do. I just got up here and was like, hey, I'll have a migraine. Yeah, I think I just want to grow on that, because I think that is really important when you're that person walking beside those young people, yourselves really, and the future selves that you will be, is to just remember that, you know, again, when I'm working with a young person, I'm never up here, I'm right here. They in fact probably know way more than me about what they need and how to go about it and how to get it. So I really appreciate that's what you shared. We all need someone to walk beside us. And so I think as systems navigators, that's what we need to be. And that's what we need to be able to show the young people that is there. Again, just coming out to an event like this, I applaud everyone because it's not easy to come up. To come to an event, to not know there's going to be other people here and who are you going to know and what is it all about. That's a big first step. I think when we're talking about navigating this system or all of these different systems that are so interconnected and so necessary, it really is having these big conversations like this. Like right now, there's so many different connections that were made today. And again, there's going to be, when we're talking about sort of sharing Indigenous needs or Indigenous sort of supporting those communities again and walking beside them, there's going to be Ontario Health Team is creating this beautiful system that is going to be culturally relevant for the 3 First Nations that are in this area. So it's going to be a culturally relevant training that's being created by Anishinaabe way to be able to provide that training to the services and to places and spaces like this one right here, to have that information, to have that knowledge, and to know what's available and how to connect to it. I feel like I forget what the question was. My nervous system is like here right now. If you want to talk about that nervous system and how to regulate and fight and flight, I love those conversations. I'll tell you exactly what's going on in mine.
I just wanted to add, I feel like the other piece that would be very beneficial here in London is that I honestly envision every single mental health and addictions resource center like the YMCA. And the reason being is that we have too many closed doors, we have too many walls, we don't have a community. And one way to build a community is to have everybody in the same building. And I know that's difficult in London because it is construction season. But the way I kind of envision is to have, 4 or 5 different hubs in the different quadrants where you go into one building and then you don't have to see a psychiatrist. Maybe that day you just need to play some basketball. Maybe you just need to go for a walk. Maybe you don't need a diagnosis at this point. Maybe you just need to call your mom because you haven't talked to her for a number of days. Maybe you had a conflict with your brother and you wanted to overcome that, right? And I think the issue with the system is that we overemphasize the genetic factors. We overemphasize the need for medications. I'm not against them, they're very important, don't get me wrong, but we underemphasize everything else equally important. And I say this because I came here as a refugee to this country, and not one of us was connected to mental health supports. And the reason being is that when we came here, we had the Bosnian community here. We had our soccer club, which was very well connected, that ran bingo nights, that ran, social parties. There was always a person in the community that helped with finances and housing and navigating. There was a person that showed you the great restaurants and the bars, right? And I think that piece is very much missing in London. I think we often, start to panic and we think, hospital is the right answer, or we need to see a counselor right away. But often a lot of our struggles are very much tied within relationships. And I think it's important to really highlight that interim support where we don't need to meet the check boxes. We don't need to go through criteria heavy assessments, wait another 3 months to see somebody and then wait another 3 months. By then it has passed, right? So what I really would like to see connected to a lot of these, whether they be psychiatric assessments or doctor's assessments, that they include in there, is there a cultural group that this person is a part of? Where are they located? Does this person love soccer? Let's get them to connect it to a soccer team. in addition to taking your medications regularly, you must also exercise regularly. And I don't think we emphasize those pieces, and that's why it's not sustainable anymore. People, I think, are relapsing because I think we're sending the wrong messages. And I think there's a lot of issues in that system, right?
Thank you, Ernest and Megan. Those were great responses, and I think like what I'm seeing is, it's the humanistic, piece that actually can really help, with that extra part that can help to bring people together and feel supported. And I think there's something very special about, us all being connected here in this room, and that really does help with, creating that support. And tools for just understanding what, you know, we're here, we make a friend, you know, they tell us what's around, and I think that's, you know, that's the beauty of having a community, and especially ones that do cater to cultural groups as well, is extremely important. So, okay, we're going to have our, question period, so, I'm just gonna hand the mic over.
Hello everyone, I'm Firuz. Same as Ernest, I came from different country here, and myself as a protected person. But 10 years mental health, I hear the voices, all of that. But finally I fixed because me and some of you knows the doctor version. He teach me the ways to how to fix myself, stop alcohol, stop that other narcotics too. So important is for me, I fix myself with the discipline. Ernest knows sports, YMCA, pickleball, soccer, basketball, all of that. And daily routine, because I understand too, you cannot always be happy or sad or optimistic or pessimistic, realistic. Like all of them changes, like how's the heartbeat. Like I changed myself, I healed it. 10 years takes, but I healed it. Some people still keep going. How about the others to share like that things to heal it, to take that people's information and share with others who gives the permission. So other people to watch other people's life, because nobody higher than us. Nobody higher than us, we are not higher than other one. Like you know something I don't know, I know something you don't know. She knows something both of us doesn't know. Like that things I wanna ask him to, that's the possible way to who healed it. So try to collect information who's similar illness habits, so help each other like that.
I'm just gonna have, I don't know, did you want to respond to that, or you want to?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I was just curious, do you guys keep in track of the clients that you have that go into, adulthood, like later adulthood, and, is that something, like if you don't, is that something that, you could do in the future?
In my position, absolutely, I do, keep track, like I said. For right now, I've been there for 7 years, so a lot of the young people I started supporting at 15 are now 20 something. And they've moved on and they've gone back to school, or, you know, some of them are still struggling, but I absolutely keep in touch with all of the young people that I support. And continue to support them in any way that I can, or connect them to the supports. Like again, if they've gone, a lot of them have gone away for school, which is amazing. So, you know, supporting them long distance and still keeping in touch as best that I can. So I absolutely keep in touch with all the young people as much as I can. Of course, when it gets to, you know, over 25, it's up to them to sort of reach out, but I'm always there. It's nice.
Yeah, so our program does as well, our criteria is to support, clients up to 3 years, right? But often we support way beyond that, right? Because of all the complexities that we've talked about this far. But there were some clear patterns that at least I've seen as a frontline social worker and as a clinical specialist in middle leadership, and I've worked in the private sectors and the community sectors and hospital sectors, and there was usually two components that I noticed where people tended to be doing well later on, and they were usually around they had an increased routine activity that was on an ongoing and steady basis, so they were out there making networks, making relationships, and they reduced their isolation. So those two components were very important factors in recovery. And I noticed that on the opposite end, the more people isolated, the more they self-internalize themselves, to be unworthy and unloving or whatever it may be, right? And they struggled and relapsed, right? And which is why I really highlight the importance of stigma reduction, that, kind of like you mentioned, Farouz, everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Well, we all focused on our limits, we'd get nowhere. We'd be in a walking chair, moving chair, trying to get to Toronto. It's just not going to happen, right? But I do think everybody has talents, no matter if you're struggling or not. There's always something that you can do, right? And I always say it's much harder to dwell on those things you don't have or can't do than it is to actually just get out there and you guys are the future leaders, and I really believe in you.
Hi, do you have any advice or tips, being someone with lived experience with past trauma, with how to navigate or work in this field without essentially re-traumatizing yourself over and over again?
So some of the things that I found helpful, right? Because I initially thought, working with this population and it's going to re-trigger me, right? But one of the things that has really helped is that you got to take good care of yourself, right? So you got to find that own inner happiness and that joy and that balance in your life to be able to help somebody else, right? So it's important to every once in a while check in with yourself, right? So some people get into routine exercises where in the morning they just ask themselves, how am I doing right now? What is it that I need for today that's going to get me through the day, right? So having that emotional awareness of nurturing your mind, body, and environment on an ongoing basis is a good deterrent towards being re-traumatized with a population. And sometimes when it gets to that point too, right, you're going to have some supports with your colleagues and within the organizations that you work for, and if they support mental health and you reach out to them, and then the next thing they do is look into an attendance program, then you stand up against that stigma, right? Because they said they're going to support mental health stigma, right? So there are ways to manage, but the first and most important thing is yourself.
Yeah, I would really agree with that as well, because that's a great question, because a lot of people that do come into frontline work, frontline mental health work, it's either they're a very empathetic person or they're an empathetic person with lots of trauma, or both. I mean, it definitely is finding what works for you again, and just finding exactly doing that self-care. I know that's such a cliche, but it really is. It's starting with understanding it. It's quite a journey to try and understand what works for you. I mean, if you're a frontline worker working in mental health and you're not going to, counseling or therapy, then I don't know if you should still be in it, it's a practice that you need to have for yourself. Whether it starts again with the morning or, becoming a trauma therapist, because you're like, how do I fix my nervous system? But It really does come down to figuring out what works for you and really practicing that every day, because there are going to be a lot of times that you are triggered by what's going on and what a client is telling you or what they're saying, and how do you bring yourself back down. It's just go make friends with horses. I just horses are the new way for mental health. No, just kidding. But that's a really important question. I really thank you for putting that out there. And again, I wanted to say too, it just came to my mind, that when Ernest, it's like, I want to call you something else. Ernest, was that it's the importance of all of us coming together today, because it really is so important. It's almost like, I have a question right now for a young person I'm supporting for Ernest. It's making those connections and making those contacts and being able to say, all these places, all these faces in here today, and being able to connect. You have something, information that I don't have, and something that can be useful for me. So it's everywhere in every walk of life, really. We all have something that's going to support someone else with something. And again, I agree with having all services accessible in one main hub. That's, I mean, YOU's got it right for that, for sure. It's having all those services and opportunities available. But that's a great question. I'm curious what your self-care is, but you don't have to say it out loud right now. Just good to know.
Awesome. Thank you so much to both of you. I think and also thank you to the audience as well for your questions. We had some amazing questions that were asked, and thank you for being part of this conversation. And that's what we want to do, is bridge what we have in the system and is working with things that we don't know. And that's where you as innovators can come in hand and help out with this. So we're going to wrap up this panel, and but I want to say thank you to Megan and Ernest for your insights. Well, thank you so much. And I think the things that came out of this conversation were extremely helpful. And I think for tools that we have, and I think there's a lot of tools that we actually do have, and we just need to use it. And the experiences that you have, I want you to take power in that, use that. You have that experience, you have that knowledge, and you have it. So bring that forward when you are creating, and be proud of that knowledge that you have. Okay, so thank you to you both.